Is it safe?
You talking to me?
Is it safe?
It's what safe?
Is it safe?
With these three words, one of Hollywood's most indelible incarnations of pure evil secured its place in motion picture history. Following his celebrated entry into the world of independent production with Chinatown, former Paramount studio chief Robert Evans set his sights on Marathon Man, a best-selling novel from acclaimed author and Academy Award-winning screenwriter William Goldman.
Sidney Beckerman, who was a producer in town, gave it to my associate, a fellow named Gary Chasen to read. And he walked into my office and said, "Evans, you got to make this film." I got Sidney in the office and said, "Let's make it."
Sidney Beckerman and Robert Evans bought it and wanted me to do the screenplay, which I did. And Evans at that time was a famous studio head because he had been a model. It was like you gave a guy you saw on the street the head of Paramount Studios. It was nuts. It was ridiculous to give someone with that background, and he was wonderful at it. And he had a huge success.
When I was making Jaws, I had a couple of days off, and one of the producers, David Brown, gave me the galleys of the novel. And he said, "I've just finished reading this. I'd like to see if you like it." So I started reading it about 10 o'clock at night, and I finished about 4 o'clock in the morning. And when I came down to breakfast the next day, he said, "What did you think?" I said, "Oh, it's terrific. It's a great page turner. It's going to make an awful good movie." And I said, "But, you know, the guy who really fascinated me dies in the middle of the book." And 2 years later, I was playing the part.
The producers were eager to work with John Schlesinger, the honored and distinguished director of such films as Darling, Sunday Bloody Sunday, Far from the Madding Crowd, and most significantly, the Oscar-winning Midnight Cowboy.
My memory is that John Schlesinger was the one who contacted me about it, and he told me he was doing this film called Marathon Man, and had I read the book, and I said I had not. So, you know, I was interested in working with John because it had been one of the best experiences of my life, working with him on Midnight Cowboy.
One day, somebody told me John Schlesinger was looking for me for Marathon Man, and I was at that time on stage in Paris. I didn't believe it, of course. And the funny thing was that when they came over, everybody from Paramount, to the Plaza Hotel in Paris, I did not know which one of the 8 was John Schlesinger. And nobody would say, "I'm John Schlesinger," or "I'm Bob Evans," or "I'm..." So they just said hello and sit down, and I said, "Who should I talk now?" So after a while, I was lighting up a cigarette and just said, "Oh, I loved Midnight Cowboy." And somebody said, "Thank you." And so I know it was John Schlesinger. So that was our first meeting.
I found him most curious to work with. When we rehearsed, he kept a tape recorder going all the time. And so we'd try a scene this way, we'd try it that way, and then he would take the tape recorder, come home and listen to it, and come back and say, "You know, I really like this version. Let's see if we can develop this version." I mean, that's a curious way of working, but every director I've ever worked with has had a different way of working. It doesn't really matter what your work method is, as if it's where you're trying to go, what you're trying to achieve. And that's the way he did it.
He's a very sensitive guy, and he's very intelligent, and he's so alive, and he picks up everything.
He also is a director who really loved the process, I think, more than any other aspect of it. Yes, he liked getting a good take. Yes, he likes putting together the film. Yes, he likes the film working. But he loved the process, I think.
This was the only film I've ever made where the script was given to the person, and each person, from the director to Dustin Hoffman to Laurence Olivier to Roy Scheider to Bill Devane to Marthe Keller, on our first choice, we got everybody.
You don't usually get casts of that quality for a genre flick. You just don't.
As I recall, there was another of you. I have an older brother. He's a rich, successful businessman. I think my father would have disowned him.
From the start, the producers had hoped for Dustin Hoffman to star in the film. Hoffman was by then an accomplished film actor, with 3 Academy Award nominations already under his belt for The Graduate, Midnight Cowboy, and Lenny.
They got Hoffman to do it, and that was a big deal because that meant the movie would go forward.
I knew Dustin from an off-Broadway play called Sergeant Musgrave's Dance. It's written by John Arden, and we had been in rehearsal for about 2-3 weeks. We're getting close to previews, and the director suddenly decided that he didn't like Dustin's North Country accent, and he fired him.
As long as they fire you before 5 days, they don't have to pay you for the run of the play. So actors always say, I gotta get past the 5th day, and I didn't.
Now, I found out years later that at that time he was rooming with Gene Hackman. And Gene Hackman told me that Dustin was really distraught. He was really upset about, he really wanted to play that part. And of course, he went on to a couple of other shows, and the way things worked out, he was seen in one of those shows by Mike Nichols, and that led to The Graduate, and so forth and so forth. So it had been a couple of years since I'd seen Dustin when I met him on Marathon Man, but we had old memories.
It was an ironic experience and a good experience suddenly to be working with a guy that I didn't have the opportunity to a few years before.
One day a journalist asked me, what is the difference between a European movie and an American movie? And I said to him, in America you have to be in a good movie, and in Europe you have to be good in a movie. And I think I said that because of Dustin, because I saw something which happened. He watched every little thing, every actor, everything. He wanted that everything was good. So he knows that if everybody is good, it helps him too.
One of the problems that he had in the movie, rightfully so, was I think he always felt nervous about his age.
I remember joking with Schlesinger, saying, well, how old is this guy? Because I'm a little too old to, I was too old to do The Graduate when I did it.
Hoffman was probably 40 or pushing 40, even though because he's so youthful and energetic, he comes way younger.
I was close to 40. And I thought, well, if you think I can get away with still being in college, I would love to have one more shot at convincing the public that that they would still buy me going to college.
Well, Dustin still looks very young. I mean, Dustin was really much too old for the part in age, but not in spirit and what he could convey. He's such a great actor. He could have played 10 years old, maybe. I don't know. Listen, he played a woman after that. What can I tell you?
There's another thing which was so beautiful of Dustin, really. We were shooting outside, and they started on me. Why that day on me? And nobody saw Dustin's face, only me, because he was in front of, just close to the camera. And when he said, why did you do that? Would you, or whatever, he had tears in his eyes. Nobody saw it, only me. What a gift.
Hoffman's preparation for any role he plays is often thorough to the point of obsession, and Marathon Man was no exception.
There was a story floating around that I told Olivier, because he wasn't working that day, that we were in New York, and when we got back to Los Angeles, he said, how did your week go, dear boy? And I told him we did this scene where the character I was playing was supposed to be up for 3 days. He said, so what'd you do? I said, well, I stayed up for 3 days and 3 nights. And the famous line was, why don't you just try acting? And it became kind of legend. It's been quoted so many times, at least in the acting circles. And the truth is, I was the first one to quote that line, and I think it was a Time magazine interview. And of course, what they do many times in those interviews is that they leave out the reality and just put in what feels more provocative or a better story. And what accompanied him saying, why don't you just try acting? He said, and he laughed because he said, I'm one to talk. And then he was actually the first one who told me about risking his life every night, jumping, whatever it was, 20 feet in the last act of Hamlet. And the truth of it is, I didn't just stay up 3 days and 3 nights for the scene. It was a good excuse, because these were the days of wine and roses in Studio 54.
Roy Scheider, well known for his strong performances in such solid hits as The French Connection, Klute, and Jaws, came on board as Hoffman's mysterious businessman brother. getting the rare chance to play a character that's both hero and villain.
Doc is a fascinating guy because he chooses to work out his problems in a much different way than Dustin's character does. He was very touched and very moved by his father's death, but he abandoned all his hopes for whatever he intended to do, and he became a spy, became a killer, became a very jaded personality.
What's this? More bullshit for your thesis?
There's some interviews about Dad. I'd like you to read it.
Not interested.
Why not? I just want you to read it.
You're never going to face it, are you? The old man is dead. He was a drunk. He killed himself.
Yeah, Doc, but he didn't start to drink until after the hearings. It's right here in the
You've
interview.
got to be kidding.
No, look, I got it from his friends.
Where were those people when he needed them?
They were afraid like everybody else.
You think he wanted you to be throwing your life away on this shit?
But I don't think I'm throwing it away.
You are. Nothing you're going to write is going to change
Why
anything.
can't you give me the courtesy to read it?
It's over. Forget it.
Maybe for you.
Scheider took the part was because there's a scene from the book, about an 8 or a 10-page scene, which is his opening thing. In the movie, it was there, and it was shot, in which he meets a legendary other spy, and the legendary other spy is murdered in a bathroom, and he goes nuts and destroys the two people who have done it, and it's a terrific scene for him in theory.
We had a preview of it in San Francisco, and this is 76.
And toward the end of the movie, a voice, it may have been around the dental scene, stood up and yelled sadistic shit.
Violence. I mean, violence in films then was really frowned on.
And they cut that Scheider scene because of that.
He had some scenes cut out, but it didn't matter.
I thought about him physically as being that kind of a guy who was quite secure in what he could do with his body and his hands. I had an interesting experience there because I came in the morning that we were going to do that fight, and I saw two big sort of burly guys punching each other all over the set, rolling over couches and bouncing around, and I thought, what's that? And John said, well, but we want to get as the most exciting fight we can get. And I said, yeah, John, but I don't think these guys would fight like that. They're both martial arts. The Chinese guy with the thing and me with all those martial arts training. I said, this fight is really about what they don't do. So we had a disagreement about that, and I remember calling up a couple of the producers and asking them to please come down, and I pleaded my case. And I won my point. So the other actor, who was a martial arts expert, he and I choreographed that fight. We threw the other one out. I mean, I understood that John wanted something very dynamic for his picture, but I felt we could give him something different and really exciting, but something that no one had seen before.
The coveted role of Elsa, Hoffman's love interest, went to Swiss-born actress Marthe Keller. Already a celebrated actress in France, Marathon Man was Keller's American screen debut.
I took your book and put it underneath mine. I didn't know how to talk to you. I was embarrassed, so I took your book.
Aren't you embarrassed now?
Yeah, I'm humiliated.
So why do you pursue people who sit at your library table?
I don't. It's just that you're pretty.
When Martha came and tested for the part, she did not speak one word of English, not hello. And she learned to play her part phonetically.
So when she came over to test, she said she just literally sat in the dressing room while they talked to her, not having a clue what they said. She had memorized the words in the test phonetically, and they're saying, how you doing, how are you? And I think she's just saying yes, no, and literally not knowing anything.
Dustin Hoffman first day, he said, she's nice, but she's shy. She does. I did like I was shy because I said if I open my mouth, I'm...
But she didn't have to say much. Her looks are right, her hands are right, and she's a very trained, fine actress.
Once you have, unfortunately, an accent like everybody knows I have, and you get those kind of parts, which are sometimes a little bit the villain parts. Those characters are very interesting to play, like Lady Macbeth, but after a while, I stopped. I don't want it anymore. I don't want to be the bad girl. I'm not a bad girl. I'm blonde.
It makes me feel sad that we haven't worked together since, because we really enjoyed working together. It was not, I don't remember it being hard. It was very, we really liked each other.
Yeah, we had a good time. We were laughing a lot. Crying and laughing. It was all about that.
Had I not been a married man to my first wife, I think we really would have liked each other. And I mean, really.
Lord Laurence Olivier, one of the greatest actors of the 20th century, was cast in the role of the murderous Nazi war criminal Christian Zell. Olivier had been quite ill for several years, and as a result, he received very few offers to work in the profession that made him a legend.
Listen, I was an unemployed actor for too many years, hearing the name Laurence Olivier, living with Bob Duvall and Gene Hackman. I mean, and Olivier and Gielgud were gods to us.
Olivier was the actor of the century. He's the greatest stage actor probably in the history of the stage. And even though he didn't think much of his movie career, was pretty good in the movies too, as a great, great actor and a great director. And a prize-winning figure all around the world, but he was dying.
I knew he was ill. I didn't know how ill he was, and I don't think anyone did until we started shooting. I think he had like 5 different, he had cancer, he had a leg that was blown up with gout. He had so many things that were just, you know, invading him.
He was a soldier. I mean, I saw him with his problems with his legs sometimes and the veins and everything, and he just was standing there doing his things.
Larry was not only frail, he was uninsurable. The only job he had had was like 2 years earlier that a 3-day part in Sherlock Holmes. You couldn't get insurance on him. And I flew over to London and met with Lloyd's of London, and I begged them to give me 6 weeks with him. And they didn't want to do it. I said, this man's the greatest actor in English cinema and English stage, and give the man back his dignity. And I convinced them to give me 6 weeks on him. That's all they thought he would live. And we got the 6 weeks, and he shot for 11 weeks. But what happened, this is the amazing thing, the adrenaline and excitement he had within, the opportunity of working again. He didn't live 6 weeks, he lived 13 more years.
Is it safe? Yes, it's safe. It's very safe. It's so safe you wouldn't believe it. Is it safe?
I remember saying to him at the very beginning, Lord Olivier, and I said, what am I going to call you? Do I call you Sir? Do I call you Lord? I don't want to call you Larry like some people do. And he says, no, it's all right. It's quite all right, dear. He called me dear boy. It's all quite all right, dear boy. And we somehow the word lordage came out. I don't know how. And he was comfortable with that.
He enjoyed the project, and he liked his character. And he liked that Dustin and I could be rather silly about him. And we called him everything from your lordship to your Lancashire ship to your Devonshire ship to, we called him every ship you could possibly call an actor. And he loved it. He loved it.
He and Dustin have 2 opposite styles of acting. And Dustin is an organic actor. And everything comes from inside, and he worries about it, how it plays, and he's a perfectionist in what he does. Larry, on the other hand, is a stage actor and just goes by the written word and doesn't like to change anything. And at times they had some conflict, but certainly mutual respect for each other.
So Olivier was doing this kind of big stuff, and I said something to Schlesinger, and we're all new to each other, and I said, John, it's a little big. And we all do it, you know, the actors that come from the stage, it's like unconsciously, I mean, that's our craft. It's part of our craft as stage actors. You have to play it for the first people in the first row, and they got to hear it in the last row in the top balcony. And that's somehow it wasn't bad, it was just big. And I remember I said to John Schlesinger, and we had worked on Midnight Cowboy, and John said, what do you want me to, you think I'm going to go up to Sir Laurence Olivier and tell him he's over the top? I am not going to do that. If you want to do it, you can do it, you know. And I said, you serious? He says, yes. And I went up to him, and I said, Lord, I said, you know, remember when we were just running the lines before we started the scene? You know, we just have line rehearsal. And he said, yes, dear boy. And I said, well, you had some really good takes, but why don't you just do one for the hell of it, where you did it just like when we were just running the lines. And he gave me this look. And he says, you think it was too big, don't you? And I said, well, who knows? I'm not, you know, I didn't say, but just And he just looked at me like this, and he said, "Thank you."
John said to me one day, he said, "You know, Roy, I am so delighted to have Larry on this film. It's so wonderful. He's so, I mean, you look what he's doing. I mean, can you imagine all the years, all the performances this man has, and here he is in my movie, and it's just wonderful. I just adore it." I said, "John, tell him. Tell him." And he did.
Everybody did their best. Everyone was trying to do, live up to playing opposite him, and they all had scenes with him too.
He was a beautiful man. He was the original Heathcliff in Wuthering Heights. He was a gorgeous man.
As he told me during the film, he looked at me one time. I'd been bicycling around the lot, and I had my shirt off and my pants. It was a hot day, and I just came in to say hello to him, and he looked at, he saw my bare chest or something, and he said, "I used to look like that. I had a body like that once. It was so sad."
Olivier and Hoffman developed a close working relationship, marked by one very particular exchange between them.
I used to tell him in those days I was thinking of doing Hamlet, and he would give me classes in history and Shakespeare in his dressing room during all the time that it takes to light. And he would tell me about Hamlet and other parts. And after the film was over, he wanted to give me a gift. And he said he was coming over. Was it all right? I said, "Sure." And there was a knock on the door, and his driver was there holding a cardboard. I'll never forget it. It's one of the great experiences in my life. He was holding a cardboard box, and it was filled with these books. And Lordage said, "Could I come in, dear boy?" And I said, "Yes." And he comes in, and he gives me this gift, and he says, "Now, they're not very fancy." He says, "But this is my favorite edition of Shakespeare. It's a Temple edition. It's very ordinary covers, but it's my favorite." And I have it still. I wouldn't mind being buried with it. But he had pages with little pieces of paper all throughout all his plays, and he had penciled in the sides comments that he had on certain speeches. I mean, he had taken, I don't know how many hours to do this. I was overwhelmed. I remember thinking, if for some reason he couldn't have been an actor, he could have been quite happy just working in a university, sitting under a tree with a few students and just taught. He loved everything about what he was doing.
But the key to Marathon Man is in the chemistry between its stars. Perhaps one of the most gut-wrenching and most memorable scenes in Marathon Man comes when Dustin Hoffman is captured and tortured by Olivier's dangerous war criminal. Olivier's powerful performance resulted in a 1976 Academy Award nomination as Best Supporting Actor.
For about 3 or 4 weeks, Larry stayed in my guest house. And it's a lot of trees and around the cottage there. And he was doing, at the time, he was setting up to do the scene the dental scene with Dustin. And I drove him to work. I used to drive him every morning. I used to be thrilled to drive him. I'd love to be a chauffeur just so I could talk with him and everything. And he said, "You know, Robert, I've watched your gardener this morning. He was cutting the roses, and he was cutting them with such beautiful feeling. He loved what he was doing. He just loved your roses and how he cut them together, and I was fascinated watching him. But I learned how to play the part now."
No pun intended, I felt like I was in good hands because Olivier had told me about watching a gardener cut roses outside, and he came in very excited saying, "I know how to play the scene." He was like talking actor to actor, and he says, "The gardener was cutting it with such delicacy, with such love." He says, "And that's the way I'm going to check out your teeth." And he drove the scene, so it was not that hard a scene to do. I remember one moment during the dental scene where we kept doing this take over and over again because he was supposed to hurt me, and I scream. And we did a couple of those takes, and suddenly it occurs to me that I'm working with Olivier. My brain says, so what if I really because he was very frightened of hurting me. So after each take, he said, "Did I hurt you, dear boy? Did I hurt you?" I said, "No, I'm fine." He's so careful. He was so afraid he's going to nick me. So I said to myself, the next take, I'm going to make him think like he really got me.
Is it safe?
Look, I tell you, I can't do it.
And I said, "Cut." I was going. And he was sure he got me. And I said, "Gotcha."
I was out of the country when the movie opened, and I went to see it at a big Times Square movie theater, which we used to have. And it was a Saturday night, it was full. And I'd never seen the movie. And I thought, gee, this is not so terrible for what it was, and blah, 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 we're getting through it. And suddenly, your greatest horror, if you're the writer, the audience left the movie theater. And I looked up and the aisles were flooded. It was so horrible. Because it wasn't, you know, they shouldn't have left. There was some terrific stuff coming up, I hoped. And then I realized the dental scene had gotten famous even that early, and the dental scene was coming up, and they didn't want to see it. So the hundreds and hundreds of people left. The dental scene happened, and then hundreds and hundreds of people came back.
That was recut, re-recut, re-recut, and almost taken out of the picture because of the response at first.
It isn't safe. Move. They're all dead. Move.
You would be foolish to do anything hasty.
Move.
Refinements to the screenplay were the result of collaborations between screenwriter William Goldman, director John Schlesinger, the actors, and an uncredited last-minute rewrite by Chinatown screenwriter Robert Towne.
In the book, he kills the Olivier character, and I told John I can't do it.
The Hoffman character has become just as mean and vicious and sadistic as the Olivier character, and he shoots him in cold blood and he torments him. And I thought that was swell.
I'm Jewish, and the character is Jewish, and killing a Nazi, albeit as heinous as he was, in cold blood, something, as I think it happened in the book, something prevented me from doing it.
They brought in Towne to give the big operatic ending, which I never liked particularly because I hated, oh, eat the diamonds. I thought that was Hollywood horseshit. But it worked for audiences, and I'm not objecting to it.
Bob was a good friend of mine, and we didn't have the right ending for it. And Bob didn't charge anything for it. He came in as a friend.
I thought it was a stronger statement to make, not to kill him in cold blood, and that's why the whole thing was then devised of, which I think is, my opinion is that it's more interesting, is that he impales himself.
Filmed in locations ranging from New York to Paris to the sound stages of Paramount Pictures in Hollywood, Marathon Man opened in October of 1976 and was an instant smash hit for the studio, breaking the New York opening record of The Godfather. Winning a marathon, much like succeeding at the box office, is a matter of skill, preparation, and split-second timing. The story behind Marathon Man still stands as a study in all three.
Everyone on the film felt they were making something that could really work.
Well, for me, it was terrific. I mean, it was like my fourth movie of any, major picture, and to be working with people of that caliber, it was very exciting for me.
The finished product is never quite as what you wanted it to be. But you remember, when you think back on a thing that you did, whatever it was, you remember, oh man, that was wonderful working with so-and-so, or we really were cooking, whatever. You remember those things about it more than you remember, because you're not in the audience, more than you remember the thing itself.
It was wonderful. It was, for me, sometimes I get very emotional. It was a gift doing this movie for me.
Marathon Man is a very good example of a collaborative effort from everyone. I think it's one of Paramount's finest moments, and it's a film certainly one of mine.